Very good. That'll be a great day today. In junior high, senior high, you're staying with me. Life's pressures. Life's pressures. Fear of failure. You know, most of us have some fear of failure. We're going to address that just a little bit here today. Let's start by talking about some embarrassing failures. Some embarrassing failures. Failure is something that all of us have experienced at some time or another. It just happens, whether you like it, whether you don't. We tried, we gave it our best, at least we think we did, and we just couldn't get it done. Now, someone might say, well, now wait, is that true? Rubik's Cube, all right? Most of you have tried one, very few of you can do it. Mikey has intentionally mastered it just to harass me, all right? So he's read all the instructions. That's a failure. I look at that thing, I've done it one time, I took all those stickers off, put it all back on, and it worked out really good. I will admit I did it twice, because after all the stickers fell off, you can turn it and it's all black. So it works good. How about, this is the one that's really embarrassing. A lot of you guys have experienced this. You're playing slow pitch softball and you strike out. Oh man. Justin, did you do that? I didn't know we was going to have a personal testimony, but I can see you glowing from here. That's not a glowing red light there in the back. That's Justin. You know, if I'd ever done that, I'd glow like that too. Just want to point. Yeah. So you get the idea. Folks, it just happens. It just happens. There's going to be those embarrassing moments, but not all those moments are life-threatening to us. They're not major failures. They're just messed up. But life happens. And sometimes those failures are really, they're bad. For instance, for all you smart people out there, are you ready for this one? Failure to make the AP, that's the I had to ask Deb what AP stood for. The accelerated program. For all of you smart people in school who didn't make the accelerated program, I got to take math. They put me in algebra once, and then they put me back in math. They said, maybe you can take this 3 years, we'll give you 3 credits. So, you know, accelerated program was not on my agenda, so I want you to know I've never been embarrassed about not making the accelerated program. Just wasn't one of mine, but many of you have probably experienced that just a little bit. Oh, this is one that used to embarrass me to death. Reading in public. Reading. I can remember the first time I went to Sunday school as probably 8, 9, 10-year-old. One of the little kids down there in the country invited me to go. And the first thing the teacher did was give me a King James Bible and said, would you please read? I said, well, here's your Bible, and I went home. I was embarrassed to death. You can't read that stuff. I'm 65 years old. I can't read that stuff today. That's embarrassing when you get called upon to read and you don't want to. Or maybe you've got all the skill set in the world. You can hit a ball a mile, one thing or another, and you don't make the team. Yeah, that's kind of embarrassing. Or then it gets even more serious. How about those relationships? Man, we just talked about everyone's wedding lasting 150 years. But not all relationships last. And sometimes there's breakdowns of friendships or divorces or whatever there might be. And those are terrible. Oh, this is a good one. How about falling on your face in public? You know, whenever all of a sudden you're supposed to be preaching a sermon and you're thinking, I'm bored to death, I can only imagine what the congregation is. Or you're supposed to sing and it just doesn't work out that way. Here you are in front of people. I can remember one, and some of you may remember this, I shouldn't even use this as an illustration. I can remember one mother who come up to light the candles at a wedding and fell flat on her face right here on the stage. And her husband laughed and I helped her up. I've had some really wonderful weddings that were embarrassing like that. I got to tell you. I remember a girl started up the front and had one of those real long dresses like a wedding dress is supposed to be. And like this old man's supposed to know anything about dresses, I told her at rehearsal, I said, when you start up the steps, pick up your dress where you won't step on it. She didn't. And sure enough, she's standing right here wondering, how do I go forward? How do I go backwards? Because she's standing on her dress. Now you think that's bad enough? Then it ripped from here to here. Yeah. And she looks at me like, what am I supposed to do? Because I have people face the congregation. So she held her rose and her dress together while we did the wedding. Sometimes there's just those really embarrassing moments and you think, I'll never survive this. My best wedding story, since we're on them, I think I've told you that one. I'll move on. Anyway, sometimes they're just embarrassing. There's those embarrassing moments. Now you see that snake? That's my back bedroom. It was really embarrassing whenever Deb come and said there's a snake in the back bedroom. And I said, well, do something about it. Don't come and get me. Do something about it. That 46 years was in jeopardy whenever she said, you get it. Yeah. Sometimes it's just embarrassing. I'm supposed to be the brave one. That's never been a strong suit in our marriage. I send her in first, check out the house, make sure it's safe for me to go in. Sometimes it's just, look at her nod her head. It's just life, folks. Sometimes it happens. It's just embarrassing. But those embarrassing failures are not limited to us. It happened to the apostles as well. Those embarrassing failures have come their way. Let's talk about my guy Peter. Let's talk about some embarrassing, tough days that he had. In Acts chapter 26, if you'd like to turn to that, verses 31 through 35. We're going to talk about, I believe, one of Peter's most embarrassing days. Now, Jesus is he's been giving them an idea of what's coming on, the betrayal, the Lord's Supper, and they know that they're on their way to Jerusalem. They are already in Jerusalem, and here's what it says. Jesus told them this very night, you will fall away on my account. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Now here's my guy Peter. I love this guy. Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. I never will. I tell you the truth, Jesus answered, this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Here's my man Peter. Peter declares, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. But now, let's make sure we don't just include Peter, and all the other disciples agreed. I want you to think about the apostles just for a minute. Sometimes we forget to think thoroughly of these guys. The apostles, you know how much of a struggle it is for all of us. The apostles have had an intensified training. They have been privileged to see the Christ every day almost for 3 years. They've heard his message. Can you imagine what it was like at the feeding of the 5,000 and all the people are around and Jesus is teaching them, and what's taking place? Well, they're right up front. They got front row seats. And they're listening intently to what he has to say. Now, not only those public meetings, but what about at night, whenever the campfire is going and they've gathered and wherever it might be, and they're having those one-on-one conversations with Jesus, asking him all that is coming and taking place. They've witnessed miracle after miracle. Peter got out of the boat and walked on water. We witnessed the storm that was calmed. Oh, those are okay. Those are of nature. But how about the blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear? He's raised the dead. And they've witnessed all of that. And they've seen every bit of it. Now, Peter, the one who has just made these big bowls, he's been on the Mount of Transfiguration. Moses and Elijah were up there. I still don't know how they knew them by name, but they were still up there. How could they ever possibly fail on where they're at? Now Peter hears these very words. This very night, you will fall away on account of me. Once again, Peter says, not me. Never will I deny you. Let's take a hard look at this. Peter's a great man. I just have such high admiration for Peter. He's the oldest of them, we believe, and he's had to really just re-gear his whole life, his whole thinking process. He's tough. He's been a fisherman. His hands are rough and solid, and he's confident. Never. Never. What do you think? What caused Peter's failure? What do you think caused Peter's failure? What about faith? Some would say, well, Peter's faith failed him. Now, folks, listen to what I'm saying. I'm going to give you Mike's opinion. I don't think it was his faith. I think he has witnessed things and seen things that we wished we could see. I think he has had more intensified training than we ever dream of having. I think they had more intensified training in following Jesus than Bible college students have after working for their doctorate. Oh, that intensified, and to see and experience all that he has. I don't think he had a faith problem. How about a preparation problem? I don't think he had a preparation problem either. Once again, it's back on that intensified training. See, I believe the training is more than just that public audience that they've listened just like everyone else has. But remember those campfires I was telling you about? I believe at evenings, you ever notice even with a family, you've had a very busy day and all has been going on, there's been people everywhere, you've been around everyone, but all of a sudden almost everyone is gone and there's just a few of you sitting there and you start having one of those intimate conversations where you may be talking about things of the past or things of grandma or history that was going on or whatever it might be. I think that's what Peter and the other apostles have experienced at those campfires. Can you imagine what it might have been like whenever Jesus was telling them about my Father? And he might have been elaborating on what John would write, that in my Father's house are many mansions. And that night they're sitting around the fire and they're saying, now just what does that mean? What's heaven going to be like? Some of you have asked me what it's going to be like. I can tell you a little bit of what I know about the Scripture. He can say, oh, over here is what you're going to see, and oh, the streets. I've been there. I've seen it, he would tell them. He would be able to share with them as no one else could. What an intensified training. See, I don't believe that it was his faith, and I don't believe it was his preparation. I believe his problem is much of the problem that we still have in our age today. Surrender. He's still trying to be in charge of his own life. He's not totally surrendered to Jesus. Oh, I've been going with him. Most of us can say that. I've been traveling with him. I've been walking with him. I've been talking with him. I've been listening to him. Total surrender? I'd like to think I have. But when put to the test, I probably haven't. Peter had been put to the test that day. Overconfident? Sometimes we just get overconfident. Peter could have easily said, oh, I know that he is the Son of God. I've seen, I've heard, I've walked on water. I know what he's able of and capable of. But he won't let me stumble. But he does. He lets us be free agents. And Peter was a free agent that night. Jesus warned him. But Jesus has warned most of us at some time or another. You know, whenever we was feeling that I'm in charge and you've got that little twinge in the back of your head saying, no, you're not really. You may need to listen to what the Lord's convicting you of here, or whenever you've just felt so overconfident, well, that can't happen to me. Well, I've heard people say something that happened bad to some other member or some other family that they know that's a Christian, and they say, well, that can't happen to me. Yes, it can. Yes, it can. So Peter's experienced all of that. Most of us have been working at being a Christian for some time. Many times we think we've made it, only to fall on our face, embarrassing ourselves. And Peter embarrassed himself that day. Now Matthew chapter 26, once again we're going to stay right there. Remember what Jesus told him? He said, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny 3 times. So let's go over to 26 verses 69 and following. Starting in verse 69 through 75. We're going to see this. Now Peter was sitting, he's following into the courtyard of the high priest. Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. Now get this, but he denied it before them all, everyone that's sitting around. "I didn't know him. I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Then he went to the gateway. I'm going to get a little farther out of the courtyard where maybe it's not as intensified. Where another girl saw him, not the same girl, another girl saw him and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." And once again, he denied it. He denied it again. This time with an oath. I'm going to sound like the rest of the world. "I don't know the man," he would cry out. After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses on himself, and he swore to them, "I don't know this man." Immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Now we all know this part of the story. We know that before the rooster would crow, Peter would fall. What caused? What do you think the consequences of Peter's failure are? What do you think the consequences of his fall will be? Well, maybe it's going to be disappointment. We could say it could be disappointment. Most of the time, failure disappoints us, but often that disappointment is from within. Now, if I fall, it will disappoint you, but we know that takes place, and we move on, and we try to get through it. Maybe it's embarrassment. Oh, not me, that won't happen to me, and we have to face others whenever we fall, and then it's very embarrassing to have to do that. I think one of the greatest consequences that Peter had was a shame. And I've described shame this way. There's a lot of definitions. This is Mike's. I believe it's that inward disappointment and that inward embarrassment. You know, you being disappointed with me is really bad. But whenever I really get disappointed with myself, that's really hard to overcome. I can get you to forgive me, I hope. Sometimes I don't forgive myself. I believe that's what he is experiencing. I can embarrass myself in front of you, and most of you will laugh with me and help me through it. Whenever I embarrass myself inside, I stay embarrassed. And I believe that's where Peter's at. I think it's a tough situation that Peter is in. So verse 75, he went outside and wept bitterly. Many times, folks, get this, the consequences of our actions are more hurtful than the act itself. Because we carry that event. We carry that failure. We carry it with us, and we relive it, and we go through it over and over and over again. And it stops us in our tracks. We are afraid to try again because we are afraid of failure. And I believe that's where Peter was at. Now, why do I believe that? Well, let's take a look at what takes place following his denial. Consider what Peter will do, the notable absences. If you were to read in John chapter 19, you're going to find the account of the crucifixion, one of the better accounts of the 4 Gospels. And as Jesus is on the cross, suffering and bleeding and dying, who does he see? It's not Peter. Hasn't Peter been the noticeable leader throughout all of this? He looks down and he sees his mother. And there's John, the beloved apostle. Mother, behold your son. Son, behold your mother. It doesn't mention Peter being there. He's not around. If he is, he's not mentioned by any of the Gospels. What about afterwards, they're in the room, and Thomas says, now Thomas is speaking up, unless I stick my fingers in his hand and in his side, I won't believe. Do you find any mention of Peter, the predominant leader, there? No, he's still suffering that internal failure and embarrassment, and he's having trouble with it. What about at the tomb? Was it the apostles that were at the tomb, or was it the women who had been following him? It was the women. Now Peter will be seen there. He will run after they come back and tell that they've taken him. But at first, whenever he first heard word of it, he didn't respond. Peter's missing in action. He doesn't seem to be very visible. His role as the predominant leader that he had been, it's not there. That aggressiveness is gone. Now get this. Okay, so Peter failed and he embarrassed himself. Yes, he fell on his face. And there's many times that we've embarrassed ourselves, and yes, we've fallen on our face. But now what? Now what? Now what is so important? In John chapter 21, if you'd like to turn to that, in John chapter 21, you're going to find some of the accounts that take place. Let's go to verses 4 through 6. Now what did Jesus told them the night that they would hear him say, you all will fall away on account of me? But he said, I'm going to go ahead of you into Galilee. Remember that part? I'm going to go ahead of you into Galilee. Now, if you go to verse 21, they're in Galilee. They're fishing. And here's what's going to take place. Verse 21, 4 through 6. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them. Now, they're out fishing. He called out to them, friends, isn't that neat? Friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. When they did this, they were unable to haul the net in because of the number of fish. Friends, so the very first thing that we're going to see is that Jesus said, you're still my friends. All of them have run away. Peter's the one who's the most obvious. Peter's the one who's embarrassed himself the most. But even, folks, now please take note of this. Even when you've embarrassed yourself, what a friend we have in Jesus. What a friend we have in him. Even whenever we've fallen on our face in front of the world, and no one else is there to help us up, it'll be Jesus who will say, friend, friend, offering us that hand to get back on our feet. And that's what he did with them. Let's go on. Verse 12. I've selected verse 12 as well. Now next he said, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Come and have breakfast. Now, why did I select that? One of the times that we know that we are doing well is people sit down and eat together for a social event, not just for a food event. All right? If I go today, it's a complete garden. All right? It's not a food event, it's a social event where I get to talk to people, get to visit with people, get to learn something about them, get to enjoy my time with them. Now the disciples are grieving. You ever notice what we do after a time of grieving? They're grieving over their friend Jesus. They've embarrassed themselves. So what do we do after a time of grieving? Well, if you're in the church family, we have a fellowship dinner for you in the basement. And people come out, and what do they start doing? They sit down in groups and they start sharing memories of the deceased or of times that have been spent together. Jesus said, come and have breakfast. Let's sit down together. Let's share some time together. Let's go to verses 15 through 17. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, uh-oh, here it comes. Now, if I was Peter, now I know this is all about me. Here it comes. I'm embarrassed again. Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said it, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Now that aggravated Peter a little bit. He was hurt, but Jesus was stressing a point. What was the cure for Peter's failure? What was the cure for his failure? Forgiveness and moving forward. Forgiveness and moving forward. Jesus has just forgiven him. Many times, after a real embarrassing failure, people quit. It causes them to just throw up their hands and quit. Now, in this case, this is a person that Jesus has great plans for. But now wait, that's true in your case as well. Jesus has great plans for all of you. Each one of you, he has an individual plan for. People with faith. Well, Peter was a person with faith, and so are you. People who had prepared. Peter could not have been any more prepared than he was. People with skills. Oh, Peter had skills that were unbelievable. Now, please catch this. Today, know that failure does not mean that you are a failure. If you have failed, it doesn't mean that you are a failure. It means that you fell on your face. It means you got a friend who is offering you a hand. So how can failure in life result in good? Well, whenever I fail, it may give me new direction. It makes me reevaluate and say, I need to be in a different spot. It may give me a better determination. I think Peter becomes more determined than ever. Feed my sheep. And that's what he'll be about. It will prepare me to deal with other crises in life. So you let God turn your failures into something good. Well, the topic of the sermon was the fear of failure. The fear of failure caused people to not even try. They say, I've already messed up, I've already failed, I can't. Let's think about Peter. Peter got out of the boat and he failed. He walked on water, no one else did, but he failed. Peter followed into the high priest courtyard. Only John did that besides him. Jesus knew that Peter would fail that night and even warned him. But now get this. This is important. This is the whole crust of the sermon. Jesus also knew that if Peter didn't let embarrassment failures defeat him, it would be Peter who would speak to thousands on the day of Pentecost. It was Peter who stood up on the day of Pentecost and preached to them and got the others started. It was Peter who was willing to make that happen. It was Peter who would stand before the Sanhedrin and say, the proof is here, this lame man walks. He said, is it better for us to obey you or to obey God? It was Peter who had had the courage to stand before kings and kingdoms. It was Peter who would take the gospel into the Gentiles. It was Peter who would be in the house of Cornelius whenever all Jews wouldn't want to be there at all. What if embarrassment had defeated him? What if he had quit because he was embarrassed? It was Peter who had opened the doors of the gospel to the world. Is embarrassment keeping you from doing what God wants you to do? Did you try and fail? Did you fall on your face? Did you stumble? Is is your embarrassment keeping you from a faithful service? Is reading in public because I failed as a kid? I failed as an adult reading in public. Don't let that bother you. I can remember once I tried to sing a special because I was put up to it. You talk about embarrassed, holy moly. It was bad. You know, whenever the pianist quits, you know you better quit. It was bad. Sometimes you just move forward, folks. Sometimes you just move forward. Some of you are not doing what you need to be doing for the kingdom because at some point you failed. Welcome to my world. I found that if I don't fail, I wasn't trying. Because every time I try, I'll fail. But you pick up the pieces and you move forward. Don't let your failure stop you from being who God wants you to be. We're living in a time whenever God's got great plans for you. Will you please stand as we have our invitation?